They smiled as they boxed up my mother's brooch, my father's watch, and the silver I polished for 40 years. They called it safekeeping. I called it theft. My daughter ran her fingers over the velvet-lined boxes like she was inventorying her future. My son-in-law stood nearby, arms crossed, nodding like a banker approving a transaction. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep everything safe for you," she said with that soft, syrupy voice, as if I were a fragile child, too overwhelmed to understand the weight of what they were taking. I said nothing. I simply watched. The china I carried across states when we first moved, the lace tablecloth my grandmother stitched by hand, the music box that once played softly as I rocked my daughter to sleep, all packed away, piece by piece, disappearing into carefully labeled bins, destined for storage I would never see. They moved quickly, like people who knew exactly where each item belonged in their hands. "It's just stuff, Mom." She laughed when she caught my stare, her voice light, her eyes cold. "You don't need all this clutter at your age. We'll handle it." And while their hands were full, my mind was racing, because this wasn't just things. This was my history, my memories, my blood folded into silk and wood and glass. And they weren't preserving it. They were positioning themselves to inherit it early, stripping me of my past while I still breathed. They believed my silence was surrender. But it wasn't. It was calculation. They thought they were removing my power one keepsake at a time. But they forgot what those objects taught me: how to endure, how to wait, how to build. They thought I was done. But I wasn't done. I was watching. I grew up in a house where every object had a story. My mother's hands were always busy sewing, polishing, preserving. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was disposable. The lace doilies on the side tables weren't just decoration. They were stitched by my grandmother during long winters when money was thin but patience was strong. The silver set we used on holidays came from my great-grandmother, carried across an ocean in a trunk she guarded like treasure. My father's watch, worn thin around the edges, ticked softly through every season of my childhood, through hardship, through hope. These things weren't valuable because of what they were made of. They were valuable because of what they carried: us. When I married, I carried those heirlooms into my own home like living things. I guarded them not because they were worth money, but because they were worth memory. And when my children came, I taught them the stories behind every piece. The music box that played the soft tune I rocked them to sleep with. The silver ladle we used every Christmas for the cider. The hand-painted tea set that only came out when we hosted Sunday neighbors. These aren't just things, I'd say. They belong to your story, too. They'd nod, wide-eyed, tracing the edges of each object with small, curious fingers. I believed I was planting in them the same reverence my mother had planted in me. I worked. I cleaned. I fed them before I fed myself. I took extra shifts when money was tight, cleaned houses after my long days at the factory, picked up mending work at night under a dim lamp. Every dollar that wasn't spent on food or bills went into caring for the home, for the family, for the small pieces of beauty I could afford to protect. When storms damaged the roof, I fixed it. When termites threatened the floorboards, I found the money. And through every sacrifice, those heirlooms stayed safe, waiting for the next hands to hold them. I never bought myself new clothes unless something was beyond repair. I skipped vacations so my children wouldn't feel the scarcity I grew up with. Every birthday cake was baked from scratch. Every holiday dinner prepared with care. I ironed their clothes, mended their backpacks, attended every school concert, every parent meeting. My entire life was arranged around building something steady for them, not just a home, but a legacy. And as they grew, I dreamed of the day I would pass down not just objects, but the stories sewn into them. My daughter would wear my mother's brooch on her wedding day. My grandchildren would sip cocoa from the delicate china cups at Christmas. They would know who came before them, and what was sacrificed to give them this life. That was my dream. That was what made every long shift and every silent prayer worth it. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The daughter I raised to cherish history now speaks only of value, but not the kind you measure in love, the kind you measure in dollars. I first noticed it when she married. Her husband, always so polite, always so careful with his words, would glance around my home with quiet calculation. "You have quite a collection here," he said once, running his fingers along the edge of the old dining hutch. I smiled politely, thinking nothing of it at the time, but I see it now for what it was. As years passed, their visits grew more infrequent. Holidays became rushed affairs. My daughter's laughter grew thinner, her compliments more forced. "You really should downsize, Mom. You don't need all these things cluttering up your life." My son-in-law nodded in agreement, offering to help me sort through everything to make it easier. Easier for whom? I wondered even then. At first, I defended them to my friends. They're just being practical. They want what's best for me. I clung to that hope. Because to believe otherwise, to believe they saw my life's treasures as mere inventory, was too painful. And yet, each time they visited, their eyes moved quickly, scanning rooms, noting items. The music box, the china, the silver, all referenced casually in conversations about simplifying. They spoke with that rehearsed tenderness children use when they think their parents are slipping. They mistook my quiet for confusion. I dreamed of handing my daughter those keepsakes gently, when the time felt right, of sitting together, retelling the stories behind each one, of seeing her eyes light up with the same warmth I felt as a child. Instead, she took them like boxes off a shelf, efficient, eager, transactional, not to cherish, to possess. They see dollar signs where I see decades, investment where I see inheritance, convenience where I see sacrifice. They are blind to what these things mean because they never had to earn them. Now, as I sit here watching them strip my history piece by piece, I feel the ache I never prepared for. Not because I've lost the objects, but because I may have lost them. Still, I am not as fragile as they believe. I have spent my entire life stretching small things into something lasting, and while they think they've emptied my home, they've forgotten what remains inside me. They think they've taken everything, but they haven't taken my mind, my patience, or my plan. They think I'm done, but I am only beginning. It started as little comments, soft, harmless on the surface. The kind of remarks you dismiss because you want to believe they come from a place of love. "Mom, you have so much stuff. We'll have to figure out what to do with it all when you're gone." My daughter laughed as she said it, like it was a joke, but her eyes stayed fixed on the antique jewelry box sitting on my dresser. The one my grandmother gave me on my wedding day. The first time she said it, I smiled politely. "Well, I'm not gone yet," I answered, trying to keep my voice light. She laughed again, but the way her fingers traced the edge of the lid made my stomach twist. After that, it became routine. Each visit brought another small nudge. "Have you ever had the silver appraised, Mom? You might be surprised what it's worth these days." Or, "We could take the old coins and jewelry and put them somewhere safer. Maybe in our safe deposit box just in case." Just in case. They always made it sound like protection, like they were shielding me from some imaginary threat, as if burglars were waiting outside my window, ready to steal what generations before me had carefully protected. My son-in-law was more subtle but no less persistent. He'd mention consolidation over coffee, lean back in his chair, and talk about the burden of managing so many scattered assets at your age. He'd pull out articles about financial planning for seniors, speak about estate efficiency, and suggest that simplifying now avoids complications later. At first, I defended them to myself, to my friends, to anyone who noticed the pattern. They're just being cautious. They're thinking ahead. They're responsible. That's what good children do, isn't it? They plan for their parents. But the conversations kept coming, like slow, steady drips, wearing away at stone. "Have you updated the insurance policies lately, Mom? Do you still keep them all in that old file cabinet? Have you thought about letting us handle the safety deposit box? We can organize everything so you don't have to worry. Do you even remember what's in there anymore?" Each question was laced with that same soft voice, careful, practiced, too sweet. And every time, I swallowed the discomfort rising in my chest. The turning point came one afternoon as we sat together sorting through photo albums. She held my grandmother's brooch, turning it slowly in her fingers. "It would be safer with me," she said gently. "I'd keep it insured, locked up. The kids could enjoy it someday without worrying about something happening to it. Something happening to it. She meant me. For years, I believed I was raising a daughter who valued what I did, not the objects, but the lives they represented, the hands that passed them down, the stories embedded in each scratch, each faded engraving. But as I sat there watching her admire the gleam of the stones, I saw something colder in her eyes. This wasn't love. This was acquisition. Still, I said nothing. I wasn't ready to face what my heart was beginning to know. I wanted to believe the best. That's what mothers do. We excuse, we explain, we soften sharp edges, because the alternative feels unbearable. Even when my son-in-law suggested hiring a professional appraiser just to catalog everything properly, I agreed. I let them photograph the china, weigh the silver, examine the jewelry. It'll be good to have everything organized, Mom. For the future. I sat through it all, watching strangers handle my life's treasures like merchandise, their gloved hands cool and clinical, their notepads filling with numbers while my chest grew tighter with each passing hour. After they left, my daughter patted my hand. You'll feel so much better, Mom. Everything's protected now. You don't have to worry anymore. But I was worried, not about the things, about them. The things I cherished for a lifetime, that I protected through every sacrifice they saw, only dollar signs. Not a single story, not a single tear shed to keep those items safe. Not a single moment of gratitude for the life they were handed, because I carried it all for so long. I tried to explain it once, gently. These aren't just things, you know. Every piece has a story, a meaning. My daughter smiled, but it was thin. Of course, Mom. But we can honor the memories while keeping everything safe. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Harder. As if my love made me irrational. As if my care for these heirlooms was a symptom of decline. That's when the dread truly set in. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. They weren't protecting me. They were positioning themselves. Preparing. They didn't see a mother anymore. They saw an estate. And while I smiled and nodded, I began to truly see them too. Not with anger. Not yet. But with clarity. They thought I didn't notice. But I did. And while they prepared, so did I. It happened quietly, like a slow unraveling. A thread pulled here, another there, until the whole fabric of my life slipped through my fingers while I sat politely in my own chair. They framed it all as kindness, as care. We're just organizing things for you, Mom. It's easier this way. You shouldn't have to worry about managing all of it anymore. My daughter smiled as she said it, her hands moving confidently through my home, pointing at boxes already labeled. The appraisals had been done. The paperwork had been signed by me, yes, but under the comforting haze of their soft voices, carefully timed explanations, and endless reassurances. You're still in charge, Mom. We're just streamlining. Streamlining. That word clung to me like a thin coat in winter, not enough to cover what was really happening. The first items to disappear were the high-risk valuables, as my son-in-law called them. The jewelry, the silver, the antique pocket watch my father wore every day of his life. They packed them into velvet-lined cases, locked them into safes I was no longer allowed to access, and then without ever telling me sold most of them off. Liquidated, they said. It's for your benefit, Mom. You'll have more flexibility, less to insure. We're protecting your legacy. Protecting my legacy. The china cabinet emptied next. The lace tablecloths, the crystal glasses, the serving platters used for decades of Christmas dinners and birthday parties gone. I watched as strangers carried the boxes out, their polite nods hollow, their arms full of my history. Each time I protested, even gently, they answered with pitying smiles. You don't need these things cluttering your space, Mom. It's safer this way. But those were for the grandchildren, I whispered once, voice trembling. Oh, don't worry, my daughter assured me, patting my hand. They'll enjoy the money much more than old dishes. The house, my house, grew quieter, thinner. Each room still stood, but hollowed out. The furniture remained for now, but the walls held no stories anymore. No echoes of laughter, of whispered bedtime stories, of tiny hands tracing the patterns on old quilts. The silence felt heavy, like walking through a museum where nothing belongs to you. Even my bedroom wasn't spared. My jewelry box empty. My closet rearranged, as if to suggest I needed less now. Simpler wardrobe, Mom, my daughter explained. It's good to clear out things you no longer wear. My Sunday hats, my scarves, my mother's brooches. Gone. Friends stopped visiting. There was nothing left to admire, nothing familiar for them to hold on to. They offered careful questions when we spoke. Are you sure you're comfortable with all these changes? They asked. Oh, yes, I'd reply, forcing the smile. The kids are just being helpful. You know how they worry. But inside, I was shrinking. The mail came less often now, as accounts were consolidated, paperwork redirected. My daughter handled the bills. My son-in-law handled the investments. Everything was simpler now. Everything handled. And then came the day they spoke about the house itself. You shouldn't be here alone anymore, Mom. It's too much space for one person. The upkeep, the utilities, it's unnecessary. My daughter held my hand while she said it, as if she were breaking gentle news. We found a lovely community for you, all your needs taken care of. No more stress, no more responsibilities. It was the final step in a plan they had been executing for months, maybe years. I sat in my living room, staring at the empty spots where Heirlooms once stood, and realized I was already a guest in my own home. A house stripped bare while I watched, nodding like the dutiful mother they trained me to be. The contracts had been signed, the sales completed, the bank accounts merged. For your benefit, Mom, everything's secure now. Secure, yes, for them. And as I stood in the doorway of my own home for the last time, watching the moving van pull away, my chest hollowed out like the rooms behind me. I whispered the truth they refused to hear. The wall still stood, but they held no stories anymore. They smiled while they took everything. But while their hands were full, I was not empty. I watched. I counted. I remembered. They think I am done, but I am not done. The silence they thought they handed me became my weapon. While they believed I was sitting quietly in my new room, neatly contained, harmless, I was tracking. Every soft goodbye they whispered as they carried my heirlooms away became another breadcrumb I followed. They underestimated how sharp memory becomes when you have nothing else left to hold. I started simple. Dates, names, notes. Every receipt they casually left behind while managing my affairs, I copied. Every bank statement redirected to my daughter's address, I found ways to obtain. I asked careful questions during visits. How's the financial planner you've been using? Did the appraiser seem satisfied with the auction values? They assumed my questions were confusion. I let them think so. The staff at the facility were kind enough. They saw me as a sweet woman adjusting to her new life. But one young nurse noticed my quiet focus. She brought me my mail. She spoke to me like an equal. And one evening, with a long pause, she said gently, "You're watching them, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I only smiled. She nodded, as if she understood anyway. Through small favors, quiet conversations, and my old connections, the ones my children forgot I had, I built a network. My old neighbor's son was now an estate attorney. A friend from church had a cousin in the insurance business. Each provided pieces of the puzzle, always under the guise of polite concern for my well-being. But I was not confused. I was constructing. I discovered that several of my items had been sold within weeks of being safely stored. The silver set was auctioned in another state. My father's pocket watch was in the hands of a private collector who likely never heard the story behind its scratches. The brooch, my grandmother's brooch, was purchased by a luxury vintage jewelry dealer. They hadn't just taken my possessions. They had scattered my legacy. I hired a private investigator next. Discreet, professional. She met with me off-site during my medical appointments. She pulled the full picture together, the shell companies used for the sales, the dealers contacted under my daughter's name. The funds quietly transferred into accounts listed under trusts I never approved. Each file she handed me was another thread woven into the truth. The bank transfers, the auction house agreements, the inventory lists, all carefully organized in a binder that grew heavier with every visit. My children's carefully curated web of protection was nothing but thinly veiled greed. They thought they erased my past, I whispered one evening, thumbing through the growing stack of documents. I was following their trail. The words felt cold on my tongue, but solid. For years, I had fed them with my sacrifices, loved them through every hardship, wrapped them in everything I had. And now, they thought my silence meant surrender. But silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. I recorded everything, every phone call, every email forwarded by kind souls who no longer wanted to watch me be stripped of my dignity. I built my case brick by brick, quiet as snowfall. They never noticed. My daughter continued her visits, bringing me soft scarves, lavender hand lotion, and fake smiles. My son-in-law stayed behind the curtain, managing my portfolio, as if I were too delicate to understand percentages. They thought they had buried me under the weight of paperwork and legal forms. But I read every one of those papers. Every clause they once slid under my hand was now a map I followed to the heart of their scheme. I wasn't screaming. I was tracking. And they would soon learn that the stories they tried to erase were far more durable than they imagined. The day I finally moved from tracking to action, it was as quiet as everything else I had done. No announcement, no warning, just a pen in my hand, signing my name on the first set of legal filings. My attorney, patient, sharp, respectful, slid the documents across the polished desk. She didn't speak much. She knew I wasn't fragile. She knew I was ready. The evidence I had gathered over months was airtight. Misappropriation of funds, fraudulent transfer of property, breaches of fiduciary duty, unauthorized asset liquidation. Every signature they coaxed from me, under the sweet guise of help, was now laid bare. Each document transformed into a weapon they never saw coming. The financial institutions involved the banks, the auction houses, even the insurers received certified notices first. Their compliance was quick. Once they saw the paper trail, they distanced themselves from my children's tangled web of estate management. Some even offered quiet apologies through their lawyers, eager to settle before public scrutiny could expose them. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wanted my history. My attorney and private investigator coordinated buybacks through discreet intermediaries. Some items returned to me directly. The music box, my father's watch, my grandmother's brooch recovered from private collectors who hadn't even realized they were part of a crime. Some pieces were lost for good, resold too many times to trace. But the courts made sure every lost heirloom had its equivalent value returned, with interest, with penalties. They scattered my history across pawn shops. I gathered it into a courtroom. The judge ruled in my favor with quiet authority. A clear and sustained pattern of financial exploitation, he said. My daughter and son-in-law sat at the table across from me, pale, eyes cast downward. They avoided looking at me. They still couldn't understand how I had slipped beyond their control. Restitution orders followed. Trusts they had secretly established were dismantled. Frozen assets unlocked. My home, which they had already sold off for their own gain, was beyond recovery, but the proceeds were ordered returned. Every dollar, every cent. I watched it all unfold not with anger, but with a kind of stillness they never expected. They thought I would be too embarrassed, too hurt, too weak to fight back. But they misunderstood the nature of women like me. We endure, and when the time is right, we rise. The facility where they once thought they tucked me away remained my home, but now, truly by choice. I walked the halls knowing I stood taller than the walls themselves. My possessions, once ripped from my hands like cheap merchandise, were carefully unpacked in my room again, their familiar weight returning to my shelves, my drawers, my heart. The music box played its old song once more, soft, steady, familiar. And as I listened to its delicate notes filling my small apartment, I closed my eyes, feeling the quiet triumph wash through me. They thought the paperwork would bury me. They thought the contracts, the titles, the signatures would cage me. But they never understood that those same documents, when read carefully, when followed patiently, could become keys instead of chains. I wasn't loud. I wasn't bitter. I was thorough. And in the end, I took it all back, quietly. When the rulings were final, and the last document stamped, I didn't make any announcements. No dramatic phone calls, No tearful confrontations. I simply began securing what should have never been at risk in the first place. The first step was to close every door they once crept through so easily. Every joint account, every proxy authorization, every access point they used to insert themselves into my affairs erased. The banks now knew them not as trusted family, but as individuals permanently barred from touching so much as a penny of my estate. My attorney and I sat together for hours, calmly crafting a new estate plan. Ironclad, protected, untouchable, every clause airtight, every loophole sealed. Not one document left room for interpretation. There would be no more power of attorney passed with smiles and soft reassurances. No more quiet asset transfers disguised as protection. No whispered, just-in-case clauses, slipping into the fine print. And for them, nothing. Not a single inclusion. Their names, once plastered across accounts and legal titles under the sweet banner of help, were absent now. My wealth, my possessions, my remaining years fully mine. And after I'm gone, none of it will flow into their waiting hands. Not a cent. Instead, I set up funds to serve women like me. Legal aid for elderly women facing financial exploitation. Advocacy programs placed inside elder care facilities. Free consulting for those who feel trapped but don't yet have the words to name what's happening to them. The programs would outlive me, standing like silent shields for women whose children, nieces, nephews, or helpers view them as easy prey. They stole my heirlooms, I whispered as we notarized the final batch of documents. My voice even, steady. I stole their future. It wasn't revenge in the way most people think of it. There was no fire in my voice. Only clarity. They had wanted my past, the jewelry, the china, the silver, the stories embedded in my life. But what they never counted on losing was their imagined future, the one where they lived comfortably off the back of my labor, my sacrifices, my loyalty. Now, every path they once counted on was blocked. Every exit sign replaced with a wall they cannot move. They will grow old without the safety net they assumed I would always provide. And while they look toward the horizon and see uncertainty, I sit calmly, surrounded by the things they once snatched like scavengers all returned, all mine again. The facility remained my home by choice. The staff no longer spoke to me like a fragile ornament. They addressed me with respect, aware of who I was, not just a resident, but a survivor who rewrote the ending they assumed was guaranteed. Other women here now quietly ask for advice. We meet in small groups, behind the soft hum of daily routine, teaching one another how to see the signs early, how to protect what matters, how to write their own contracts, not just sign the ones handed to them. My daughter tried briefly to reach out. Letters arrived, carefully worded, full of soft regrets. We never meant to hurt you, Mom. We thought we were doing what you wanted. We're still your family. But family is not built on signatures stolen in soft voices. Family is not built on theft draped in concern. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us is louder than any argument could ever be. At night, I sit by my window, the same view I watched when they first tried to strip me down to nothing. But now, every shadow cast across the parking lot feels different. Not cold. Not hollow. Just finished. They stole my heirlooms. I stole their future. And I never raised my voice once. The calls started pouring in before the ink had dried. My daughter's name lit up the screen first, again and again. Mornings, evenings, even in the middle of the night. Her voice, once cool and careful, now trembled on the voicemails. Mom, please. We need to talk. It's all gotten out of hand. We never meant for it to end up like this. You misunderstood. I let it ring. Her husband called next. Less apologetic, more desperate. This doesn't have to go any further. We can work something out. We're still family after all. Still family. Those were the words they clung to like a fraying rope, as if the years of calculated betrayal could be swept away with one tired phrase. As if I had simply overreacted. As if all it would take was a polite lunch and a few careful smiles to reverse what had been done. I let those calls ring too. Then came the letters. Long, carefully written apologies. Rehearsed language. We only wanted what was best for you. We were trying to protect your legacy. You can't cut us out over a misunderstanding. They never used the word theft. They couldn't bring themselves to say greed, but I saw those words hidden between every line. Family, friends, neighbors, even distant relatives who once stayed silent while my life was being stripped now found their voices. They called with hesitant concern. Maybe you could find it in your heart to forgive, dear. After all, it's done now. You have your things back. Isn't that enough? Enough? They watched as my children took everything I spent a lifetime protecting. They offered no concern then. They praised them for being such responsible caretakers. Now, faced with the consequences, they speak of forgiveness. But forgiveness is not owed like a debt. Their regret isn't my responsibility. Their greed was never my fault. I have learned that silence is not weakness. It is protection. My peace does not depend on whether they feel guilty. It doesn't require their understanding or their approval. They made their choices while I was quiet. Now I choose to remain quiet while they sit in the discomfort they created. The facility hums along each day. My life is full again, but in a new way. The weight of the missing heirlooms no longer sits heavy on my chest. Most have been recovered. Some remain lost, but their power over me is gone. What mattered most was never the objects, it was the choice, the control, the dignity they tried to steal. Other women still come to me quietly. New residents, cautious daughters of friends, kind staff members who sense what we've built here. We talk, not loudly, but with purpose. We share names of trusted attorneys, warn of carefully disguised help. Remind one another that being cared for and being controlled are not the same thing. I watch the phone light up still. New calls, new voicemails I never open. They sit in my inbox like unopened letters, waiting for a response that will never come. The messages shift from sorrow to frustration, from guilt to anger. But they all land in the same place: powerlessness. They never expected me to have that power. And now they wait. They wait for me to forgive, to reach back, to undo what has been written into stone. But this silence is not a punishment. It is peace. At night, I sit at my window, as I always have, tea in hand. The oak tree sways gently outside. The moon rises slowly behind it, steady, unbothered by storms long past. They called. I let them wait. And I rest, not because they are sorry, but because I am free. The mornings feel lighter now. I wake when I choose, not when someone else schedules my day. The sun spills through my window, warming the worn wooden floor beneath my feet. The same window where I once sat, trapped in my silence, watching the world move while my life was dismantled piece by piece. Now I sit there with my tea, not watching in defeat but in peace. There's a rhythm to my days that I've come to cherish. The gentle hum of the facility, the quiet footsteps in the hallway, the distant laughter of other women who, like me, have begun to reclaim their own spaces, their own stories. The books stacked beside my chair aren't heavy with lessons anymore. They are simple pleasures, read for no one but myself. The tiny garden outside the dining hall has become my favorite corner. A few potted herbs, stubborn marigolds, and soft lavender growing steady against the breeze. I run my fingers through the leaves, breathing in the familiar scent, reminded of the gardens I once tended for decades. The ones they left behind without a second thought. They took those gardens from me, but never the hands that knew how to grow them. For so many years, I believed that my value lived in what I could give. The house I maintained, the traditions I carried, the heirlooms I protected. I poured myself into preserving those things for my children, believing they would honor them as I had. But as I watched them strip my home and scatter my history for profit, I faced a truth that once felt unbearable. They saw objects, not stories. At first, that realization shattered me. But now, it has freed me. They took the objects. But they never took me. I was never fragile because of what I owned. I was strong because of what I carried inside. Every late night working double shifts. Every meal stretched when money was thin. Every tiny sacrifice woven into my children's comfort, those were not stored in china cabinets or jewelry boxes. They lived in me, and I am still here. I no longer seek their approval. Their absence does not echo in these rooms anymore. I don't wait for phone calls that once haunted my quiet nights. I have let go of the hope that they would one day see me, truly see me, beyond what I could provide. That hope was their weight to carry, not mine. Other women sometimes sit beside me now. We sip tea. We share knowing glances, more than words. We recognize the quiet power in one another. We have learned that survival doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits still and breathes. The heirlooms they stole have been returned, in some form or another. The brooch glimmers again under the afternoon light on my dresser. The music box plays softly each evening. The watch ticks beside my bed, steady, like my father's heart once was. But these things, even now, are not my treasure. The true heirloom was my strength. At night, when the world softens into silence, I sit by my window, tea in hand, moonlight casting soft silver over the room. The same room where they thought they left me powerless. The same room where I quietly reclaimed everything. And I smile, not because I won, but because I am whole. They took the objects, but they never took me. The true heirloom was always mine. It started, as these things often do, with a simple conversation. A soft comment at the lunch table from Eleanor, a woman 2 doors down. She watched me gently polish my grandmother's brooch one afternoon and whispered, almost ashamed, "I used to have one like that. My daughter took it before I moved here. She said it was safer with her." Her voice trembled slightly, her eyes far away. I recognized that look, the mixture of shame and grief, the quiet ache of having your life story stripped one object at a time, dressed up as care. I reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. "You're not the only one." In the weeks that followed, more conversations unfolded. Soft confessions, quiet tears behind closed doors. Women who had given everything to their children, who had raised families with worn hands and strong hearts, only to find themselves slowly erased behind legal documents, safe deposit boxes, and polite theft. Each story was different in detail but identical in its heartbreak. We gathered informally, not a group with flyers or meetings, but a quiet circle, over tea in the corners of the lounge. On slow afternoon walks through the garden, we spoke softly, but with growing certainty. We shared names of attorneys who listened, financial advisors who protected rather than prayed, social workers who saw the signs early and didn't look away. One by one, women who had once felt powerless began to take small steps toward reclaiming control. Some still had time to stop the unraveling. Others simply found peace in knowing they were not alone in their betrayal. Even that knowledge was powerful, because what no one tells you about losing control of your life is how deeply isolating it feels. We began sharing warning signs, the phrases we had all heard. "Just sign here, it's easier this way." "We'll handle it for you, Mom." "It's too complicated for you now." We learned to recognize the language of soft control, the kindness laced with quiet entitlement, the gentle suggestions that were never really suggestions. More women joined. Ruth, Helen, Joyce, names spoken softly over tea, each carrying stories that sounded so familiar it hurt. The weight we had all carried alone was finally shared among us. And in sharing, it grew lighter. I arranged for a discreet legal advocate to visit our facility regularly. She sat with any woman who wanted her help, quietly reviewing their documents, answering their questions without judgment. She treated them like the capable women they had always been, not like fragile figures needing to be managed. We didn't hold protests. We didn't make noise. We didn't need to. Our power lived in knowledge, in quiet, steady hands helping one another pick up the pieces before they could be scattered. Because we've all lost pieces, but not ourselves, and not our power. Our quiet circle grew stronger with each woman who whispered her story. With every new voice, our silence became a kind of quiet resistance, not fueled by anger, but by truth, by dignity. The staff noticed, though they never spoke of it directly. They addressed us differently now. No more syrupy tones, no more talking around us. They saw the shift. They felt it. I look around the dining room sometimes and see it reflected in the eyes of these women. Eyes that once looked lost, now steadier, sharper, wiser. There are more of us than they know, and we are not done. At night, I sit by my window, the soft hum of the world outside wrapping around me. The moonlight spills across my desk, where my grandmother's brooch rests once again, beside my father's watch and the music box that still sings. I sip my tea, steady and full. They thought they broke us apart, but they only brought us together. We've all lost pieces, but not ourselves, and never our power.